feels like every update we've been getting out of Kentucky gets worse and worse, with the news just as we were coming on the air that 74 people have been killed by those incredibly powerful and devastating tornadoes this weekend. And employees now at the destroyed candle factory where 8 people died are telling NBC News they heard the emergency sirens but were told they'd be fired if they left. We're going to tell you what the company's response is to that. Plus, so many people on the ground still don't have power or water or internet. The comms are terrible. Rescuers are looking for any survivors. You'll hear what it's like for people who lived through these storms, for people who are trying to clean it up, and the people who have lost loved ones coming up just a little bit later in the show. Plus, back in Washington, a key vote to hold a former top White House official in contempt of Congress with new accusations about what Donald Trump's former chief of staff did right before the January 6th riot. We've got the details. And another pandemic milestone that nobody wanted, 800,000 people killed by the virus in this country. The new decision just within the last couple hours by the Supreme Court that could help one state try and slow the spread. Plus, some breaking news from the Pentagon. None of the troops involved in a drone strike that killed 10 Afghan civilians back in August will be punished. We'll explain why not, and whether the Pentagon's living up to its promise to the families of the victims. And a different way of parenting getting some new attention. No boys' clothes, no girls' toys. In today's original, the Colorado family coming together by leaving behind traditional gender norms. Hey, I'm Hallie with the latest out of those 6 states wrecked by tornadoes this weekend, with the worst of it in Kentucky. Nearly 80 people dead, more than 100 still unaccounted for. And you're about to be looking at just 4 of those towns, right? 4 of them. Look at this. It's sticks, right? That's wood. That's metal. Those aren't houses. Those aren't businesses. That's trash at this point. But that's people's lives, right? These places leveled with hundreds of National Guard soldiers now doing what they can to help. And a new focus now on that candle factory that took a direct hit near Mayfield, with 4 employees telling NBC News they wanted to leave because of the warnings, but were told they'd be fired, which the company denies. I talked with a man who was there, a survivor, when the factory collapsed in Mayfield, Kentucky. He told me how he managed to stay alive and what he heard before the twisters hit. Watch. How did you end up getting out?
Well, it was a guy that was behind me that was kind of like stuck beside me. And when he got out, I felt for the ground, and I felt that there was cardboard and plywood under me. So I started digging the cardboard out to where I could squeeze my body through the hole, because he was smaller than me. And I held my breath and just scooted back until they could grab my feet. When they pulled me out, I was on top of the building. But before it happened, I was on the concrete on the bottom of the building. So it picked me up and threw me on the roof.
Were you given the option to leave? Did you consider leaving? Can you walk us through that thought process?
Well, other people was told to stay. I was loading trucks at other factories, like going back and forth loading trucks. But what surprised me is when I went to one of the other factories, there was no employees there. And they don't leave till 7:30, and it was 5-something. So I never understood why they wasn't at work, but we were at work. And we had 2 warnings. The first warning, after the first warning, they told all of us to go back to work. You know, and I told them I was leaving, but I never got to make it out the building.
Again, the company says that employees who wanted to leave could do that. This map gives you an idea of where all this damage went down. You can see that Mayfield, the place we were just talking about, is kind of right in the center, right? You had some tornadoes scattered in northern Mississippi and Illinois, but most of it happened right along that stretch, running from the bottom left to the top right of your screen, from northeast Arkansas to western Kentucky. And right before we got on the air, we got an update from Kentucky's governor, Andy Beshear. I want to play it for you.
Our newest estimate on deaths, and these are numbers coming from emergency management. They may differ a little bit from the coroner. There's one of these we're certainly checking on, is that we are now up to 74 Kentuckians that we have lost.
The victims, including infants, one as young as 2 months old, and officials think this news could even get more grim, considering they're still looking for 109 more people. President Biden stepping in. He's going to visit Kentucky Wednesday. This is him here, taking reporters through the number of homes blown apart by these storms in that state. We're going to talk with Megan Fitzgerald in just a minute about an investigation into an Amazon facility in Illinois that collapsed. But I want to start with Kathy Park, who is in Mayfield, Kentucky. And Kathy, listen, we just talked about it, right? We showed this map. Mayfield appears to be kind of the epicenter. And it is just devastating. When you look at these images from above, when you look at these images through a TV screen, I can't imagine what it's like for you there on the ground. I know we've covered lots of weather events before, but this is in a category of its own.
Hallie, you're absolutely right. I mean, block after block, we're talking about devastation after devastation, mountains of rubble. You have entire homes, hundreds of homes and businesses completely leveled. So I'm in the downtown area of Mayfield. This is considered the business district. I am staring in front of what used to be a business. The walls have collapsed. It is mixed with debris. You have office supplies on the ground mixed with cinder blocks. And then I see, power lines just scattered all around here. And throughout the day, it's been cool and windy. So you see insulation flying around in the air. It is just jaw-dropping to see the damage. And then that candle factory you mentioned, Hallie, it's about 2 miles, just a few minutes away from here. And it probably saw the most significant damage. 110 workers were inside that facility when the tornado hit. We have some updated numbers, though. We are told that 102 people were accounted for. They survived, but 8 people are still dead. And according to sources on the ground, they're saying that now it's likely that it will become a recovery mission at this point. I was here this weekend, Hallie, just covering the story from the very beginning. And you know what? Originally, we thought the death toll would be significantly higher. When we woke up Saturday morning, the governor, I believe, he said the death count possibly at the facility would be somewhere between 50 to 70. But if there is any sort of silver lining, that number is significantly lower. Hallie?
What do people need right now, Kathy? What's the most important thing? Because I'm looking behind you, and I know there's shadows, and there's, the sun is sort of starting to set at least a little bit. But you can see people driving around, right? You can see people. I can't see anybody walking, but I definitely see movement behind you as people are, I assume, just assessing the damage at this point.
Correct. They're assessing the damage, but I think in the past hour or 2 hours or so, the cleanup efforts have certainly ramped up. You saw heavy machinery all around here. They are pushing debris around. They're trying to make way for people to start literally picking up the pieces and to begin rebuilding. Keep in mind, the population here is roughly around 10,000. Everywhere I look, there are barely any structures still standing. So this community will literally have to build from the ground up.
Kathy, I wonder if you've seen any, in a moment of devastation like this, any signs of hope. I was actually talking with the mayor of one of these towns not too long ago, and he said somebody came up and gave him $600 in cash. They'd driven in 5 hours from Dayton, Ohio, and said, I have some blessings right now, and I want to just give you this money. Use it as you can to help. I mean, that is the kind of, we keep hearing it, right? The kind of outpouring of support from all over the country as people, quite literally coast to coast and around the world, are looking at what you are standing in right now and wondering, what can I do? How can I help?
Right. So, you heard the governor. They are asking for blood donations. They are asking for more water. They're asking for supplies. They want volunteers to pitch in. And we saw that, Hallie. We saw that all across the state. Strangers who might have not been directly impacted by the tornado, they want to help. They want to do something. So we are definitely seeing that outpouring of support, that kindness. You have people coming up to us offering food. But moving forward, I mean, what's really struck me, Hallie, was that after talking to all the people on the ground here, I asked them, what do you need from us right now? And the common theme, they are leaning on faith. They want prayers. I think a lot of the folks here, they are still processing everything. They're still in shock.
Sure.
They are still saying, this is just a nightmare. This is a terrible movie. And they just want to wake up from this nightmare. Hallie?
Kathy Park, live for us there in Mayfield. Kathy, thank you. In Illinois, also one of these states hit. OSHA is now investigating an Amazon warehouse whose roof collapsed. 6 people were killed after a tornado destroyed the south part of this huge building, right? 1 million square feet. You can see it from this drone shot here. It's in Edwardsville, Illinois. An Amazon rep said employees were warned before the tornado hit. That's what we heard from the company today. 39 people stayed on the north side of the building. 7 others stayed on the south side. That's the side that's collapsed in the video you're looking at. I want to go to Megan Fitzgerald now, who's there. So, Megan, we have this OSHA, now federal investigation. There was already a state investigation. Is this standard operating procedure, Megan, or is there any reason to believe that something beyond the obvious that we just saw went wrong in this collapse?
Well, we do typically see OSHA investigating after an enormous event like this where there's loss of life. But, you know, there's a lot of questions and a lot of things that we don't know at this hour. There was a press conference earlier today with Amazon officials along with the governor, and the question was asked if there was any structural integrity issues with this building. Amazon said, you know, not to their knowledge, but this is something that they are going to be investigating. Amazon maintains that they did everything that they could. There were sirens and alarms leading up to the minutes when this tornado ripped through. They contacted drivers who were out on the road, letting them know of the dangers. They told everyone inside the facility to stay there, thinking it was safer for them to stay than to leave, telling them, as you mentioned, to go to the north of the building or the south of the building. And unfortunately, that tornado just ripped through the south side, killing 6 people. But I wanted to hear from what an Amazon official had to say earlier.
We want to go back and look at every aspect of this. There's always going to be tremendous learnings from any type of catastrophic event like this, and we want to make sure that our policies, our practices are consistent with any learnings that we have from this event and with all best practices.
So again, this is just that you're hearing from Amazon saying that they're going to investigate. We know OSHA is investigating, and then of course we've got the state investigation. So we are expecting to get some answers here in the coming weeks. Hallie.
Megan Fitzgerald live for us there in Illinois. Megan, thank you. The head of FEMA is saying we should get used to extreme storms and extreme tornadoes like the ones we saw in the South and Midwest we've been talking about. But the FEMA administrator is saying it could be our quote unquote new normal thanks to the effects of climate change. Meteorologists and climate scientists say they can't make a direct link to climate change, but they do know it's affecting the environment storms form in. That's why the president wants the EPA to investigate exactly what role that might have played in all this. Al Roker is here to explain. So, Al, can you help us unravel this, right? Because we talk a lot about extreme weather, deadly fires, really bad flooding that can be pretty directly linked to climate change. But that's not so much the case when it comes to tornadoes. Why not?
Well, because, Hallie, there isn't a direct cause and link. However, that said, when you have conditions that are very much like we would see in April or May in this part of the country, then yes, you can see tornadoes. But if we go back to that, we're getting warmer winters as we go forward from the 1970s. And so that means we are going to be looking at more severe weather. For example, this tornado, it was a recipe for a December disaster. These April-like temperatures saw record highs into the 70s and into the 80s. And so those highs, and especially in that 6-state area, 20 to 30 degrees above average. So that record warmth was the main ingredient for the outbreak. However, what we've also seen, Hallie, is over the last several decades, what we consider the traditional tornado alley from Texas on into Kansas, that's on a downward trend. The upward trend is to further to the east and to the north, the Ohio River Valley, Mississippi River Valley. That's the upward trend, and that's where we have higher population, and so those increases happen. Now, again, the most pronounced warming is in the Mississippi River Valley on into the Northeast since 1970. And we know that a warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. That juices the atmosphere, producing stronger storms. So this evolving research, Hallie, says this increased warmth may, we don't have an exact link yet, but it may cause more severe weather days in winter. And we just saw that this past weekend. And in fact, it's going to happen again Wednesday, Thursday, especially on Wednesday in that same area. Temperatures may even be warmer, Hallie, than they were on Friday.
It's so interesting, and it helps explain, Al, why this is happening. You know, it could happen later in the season, right? The idea of these warmer winters.
Exactly. And the problem, and we talked about this on Friday, what we were most concerned about, these were going to be nighttime tornadoes, and they are twice as deadly as your daytime tornadoes. Why? Well, the problem is a lot of folks are asleep. They're unaware of the tornadoes, and you can't even see them. However, we do want to give people this little advice. If you got an iPhone or an iPad, go to the settings, hit notifications, put on government alerts. This way, you will be awakened by a warning. Or you could, if you've got an Android phone, go to advanced settings, emergency alerts, and you can also download the Red Cross Tornado app from your app store, and that will also alert you when the National Weather Service in your region, in your area, puts out those tornado warnings.
Literally
Hallie.
so easy, Al. I no joke, did it on my phone, checked to make sure that mine were on as you were talking us through that. It's such important information. Al, thank you very much for being with us to talk us through that connection. I appreciate your time. We got new reporting into NBC News. The factory workers in Mayfield, we talked about this, saying they were threatened with being fired if they left work in those moments before the tornado actually hit. We're going to have the reporter behind that scoop coming up for us in just a couple of minutes here in the show. But we have a lot of other headlines to get to, too, including just a few hours ago. News coming into us late this afternoon. The Supreme Court declining to block the COVID vaccine mandate for New York health workers. That means that mandate's going to stay in effect. We learned about this as we're hitting this other terrible milestone in the U.S. You see it here. 800,000 deaths in this country. Think back to where you were a year and a half ago, right, when this pandemic started. Did you ever think you'd see these numbers? 20 months into this pandemic. And this thing still is going on. No signs of stopping. More than 50 million COVID cases around the country. We just found that out a couple hours ago. And right now, it's the Delta variant that's hitting at least 40 states. That's why they're seeing an increase in infections there. And we know Omicron, that other variant, is spreading fast, too, in 30 states now. But in a bit of good news today from Israel, it turns out a third dose of the Pfizer vaccine might offer some protection against really bad sickness. That matches up with what Pfizer told us last week. I want to get to Sam Brock, who's live for us in Miami. And Sam, you know, let's put these numbers in perspective. That's 1,100 people dying from COVID every day. But most of them, health officials say most of them are people who did not get the vaccine.
If you look at the big picture, Hallie, that's right. Once the Delta variant became the dominant variant in the United States, you are 10 times more likely to die from COVID-19, 10 times more likely to be hospitalized from COVID, 5 times more likely to be infected if you were unvaccinated versus vaccinated. One caveat to that. That used to be a wider gap that is shortened a little bit. It used to be more like 20 or 25 times more likely to die because of the fact that the Delta variant has started to rewrite the rules. Forget about Omicron. So we are seeing some changes there. But in terms of the 800,000 people in this country who have died from COVID, let's reframe this conversation for a second. That is larger than the city of Seattle. It's larger than the population of Boston. It's larger than Washington, D.C., where you are. It is about on par with the population of San Francisco. And when you talk about 50 million infections, that is 10 million more than the entire population of California. It's 2.5 times bigger than Florida, which is where I am right now. Speaking of California, Hallie, we also have some breaking news. They are reimposing in the middle of January a mandatory mask mandate, or I should say reimposing over the next several days, at least through the middle of January, a mandatory mask mandate for everybody, not just for those who are unvaccinated, vaccinated, unvaccinated, doesn't matter. Everybody's got to wear a mask.
This is that winter surge, right? I mean, this is what experts, and we've been talking about it here on this show, Sam, right? Experts said, watch out what happens after Thanksgiving. Watch out what happens after the holidays when people are traveling, they're getting together. And yet, you know, I think about the fact, listen, I live in a city. I live in D.C. You live in Miami. There's been a lot of reporting and a lot of writing about people who live in other places, right, outside big cities, who say life goes on still, right? At some point, the question has been raised, does this not just become quote unquote, the new normal, right? Despite some of the precautions that health experts would like us to continue to take, and obviously the push to get vaccinated. Tell me a little bit about what it's like where you are in Florida, right? Because I think that listen, candidly, Sam, I think there's a lot of people who can relate to this idea, who might know people, know family members who say, listen, I'm going to keep living my life, right? And take the right steps, but I've got to at some point get back to the way that I used to live.
Right now, Hallie, economically, Florida is booming in no small part because there have been fewer rules around COVID and more people and more businesses have come down here. Now, there is certainly a perception of living in this state. I can tell you I have friends and relatives that have come down here to visit, and they have told me I cannot believe what it is like here compared to New York, compared to California, compared to Chicago. They cannot wrap their minds around the fact that people are walking around largely without masks. They eat inside. Many of them don't seem to be particularly concerned. I will actually poke some holes in that general perception of Florida, which is not something I'm generally apt to do. But there are a lot of people, you were just looking at drone video a second ago, that are going out to get tested right now. I must have talked to 20 or 30 people at this testing site within the last hour. So many of them told me they were concerned about what they're seeing here right now in Florida, where cases have ticked up about 80% in the last 2 weeks. They want to get tested before they go back to work. They want to go tested before they see loved ones for the Thanksgiving Day holiday. And they are just worried in general about their family members. So I don't think it is fair to say that Florida is completely off the map when it comes to COVID policies, but it is a heck of a lot different than where you are in the District of Columbia or really any other major metropolitan city right now.
Sam, listen, I got family on the other coast from where you are in Florida, and I hear the same thing. So I think that's super important context. I appreciate you sharing that. Sam Brock, thank you so much. Breaking news now from a federal court in Minnesota. Derek Chauvin, remember him, the former Minneapolis police officer, convicted back in April for murdering George Floyd. Well, he is now expected to change his not guilty plea on charges he violated George Floyd's civil rights. Joining me now from Minneapolis is Shaq Brewster, who you might remember spent a ton of time covering this case. So, Shaq, explain this, because Derek Chauvin, we expect to see in court in a couple days from now on Wednesday. It didn't seem like everybody necessarily expected this to happen, for him to be now, we believe, getting ready to plead guilty to these civil charges.
Yeah, this came somewhat out of nowhere, Hallie, and it came as many people in this area were focused on the Kim Potter trial. And what we learned earlier this afternoon, it came from the federal district court. It was a notification that there will be a hearing, a change of plea hearing for Derek Chauvin. Now, we didn't expect this, and there was some reporting several months ago that there was talks about a potential plea deal, but there's been no confirmation that we've received that he is actually changing the plea. We've reached out to his defense attorney, we reached out to the district court and to some of the state's attorneys, and they have not responded to any of our requests for comments. But it is clear that he entered that not guilty plea a couple of months ago, and he will now be in court on Wednesday at 9 a.m. local time for a change of plea hearing, Hallie. And
let me be really clear. It's civil rights charges federally, right? So this is separate from the murder charges that Chauvin was convicted on, the manslaughter charges back in April, right? These are two separate and different things. Talk us through the civil rights piece of this, because I remember, Shaq, as we covered that trial of Derek Chauvin back in the spring, the thing we were looking ahead to was this federal issue that was set to come up, which Chauvin, again, is now appearing to get ready to plead guilty to.
Two separate things, and to help underscore that, I mean, I'm in front of the Hennepin County Courthouse right now. This is the courthouse where you saw his trial. That was the murder charges, the murder conviction, and the manslaughter conviction that we were covering back in the spring. In St. Paul, that is where this hearing will happen. It's a federal court, and it's those two counts of deprivation of rights under the color of law, and that's what the Department of Justice charged Derek Chauvin and the three other officers involved in George Floyd's death, now murder. They were being charged with depriving his rights under the color of law, essentially saying that George Floyd had the right to not be a victim of excessive force by police, and that was the charges that they were facing for that. So that is what is being litigated now. We do know that all four of those officers entered pleas of not guilty in the past, but now we have this hearing that Chauvin will be going to a hearing on Wednesday about changing his plea.
I bet we'll talk then. Shaq Brewster, thank you so much for staying on top of this story. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, no U.S. troops are going to be punished for that drone attack that killed 10 Afghan civilians, including kids, back in August. An independent investigation into the operation says mistakes were made. So why did the defense secretary come to that decision? We're live at the Pentagon after the break. We're learning just this afternoon that the Pentagon says none of the troops involved in a U.S. drone strike that killed 10 Afghan civilians are going to be punished. You had two senior commanders recommending that, and then Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin agreed. And to remind you what you're talking about, you might remember this, right? This was a strike that happened back in August, right around when the U.S. was withdrawing from Afghanistan. The Pentagon at the time described this as an ISIS target, but later acknowledged that it actually killed 10 civilians. An aid worker and his family, the family of them, 7 kids involved. Courtney Kuby is here with more. So, Courtney, these troops carrying out orders, right? Should we be surprised, or are the sources you're talking to surprised by this outcome of no punishment, or is that somewhat, expected given the chain of command here?
So given this specific case, I'm not surprised that there hasn't been that no one is being punished for this. And that's because it was very clear from the very beginning when the military started looking at this that they were going to take the entire situation at the time into account. So only literally a couple of days before this strike, 13 U.S. troops had been killed. Dozens of other Afghans and other American service members were wounded in a terrible attack at Kabul airport Everyone was on high alert and on edge. And that's the backdrop of when this happened. Because of that, the defense officials who I spoke with all along were saying they did not expect, as long as there wasn't any deliberate malfeasance here, they did not expect anyone to be punished for this.
As you were reporting this out, Courtney, today, did your sources tell you anything that you didn't expect here in this?
No, not really.
Okay.
I mean, we knew all along from the Air Force Inspector General that there was no law of war violations in this. I mean, the one thing that I do think we need to keep watching in this case, though, is the fact that the Pentagon has been saying for weeks that they would provide these payments to the family members of those who were killed, and that they would work to get those family members out. That still hasn't happened. So we're talking about 2.5 months on since this actual strike, since these 10 people were killed, and they're all still sitting there in Kabul, and they've not gotten any additional payments from the U.S. government. That's something that we need to keep asking the questions about.
So this was actually, Courtney, you're reading my mind. This was my next question to you, right? Because I know that there was this promise, right, made to the family of these victims. What is the timeline, right? Okay, so as of today, it hasn't. Is there a commitment that it'll be within the next month, within the next 2 months? Like, is there an end date to when the Pentagon says, yes, we're going to make good on this?
No, there isn't. And we heard today from the employer of the aid worker who was killed, NIE is the name of the group, and they're really decrying the fact that the government has not provided anything to this family. They have not gotten them out of Kabul, and they still have not provided a payment with them, and saying that now on top of all this, the U.S. military is not finding anyone accountable for the fact that 10 innocent civilians were killed in this tragic mistake. And that's what the military really is calling it. They are saying this is a tragic accident. What we will see going forward from this, from the military, is some procedural changes. The hope is that they will be able to implement some new policies and procedures in the future so accidents, tragic mistakes like this will not happen. But at this point, we still don't have any firm sense of what is happening to those family members. Will the U.S. government actually be able to get them out of Kabul and potentially out of harm's way?
Important questions, and I'm glad you're there at the Pentagon to get those answered. Courtney Kube, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks.
Well, people in Kentucky were terrified for their lives as a tornado approached their city. Employees at a candle factory, some of them are telling NBC News that their jobs were threatened if they left their shift early. We've got the reporter who broke the story on this and the company's response coming up after the break. The town of Mayfield, Kentucky, is trying to quite literally pick up the pieces of what's left after tornadoes left a trail of destruction there and around the region. In just a couple of minutes, I'm going to speak to a minister there about how his community is trying to deal with this. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Mexican musical legend Vicente Fernandez, known as the king of ranchero music, died over the weekend at 81 years old. He sold more than 50 million records worldwide and won 3 Grammys and 8 Latin Grammys. Number 2, the Coast Guard is stopping the search for a woman who went overboard the Carnival Miracle cruise ship this weekend off the coast of Mexico. This was reported to have happened early Saturday. They were looking for her for something like 30-plus hours. Number 3, earlier today, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met with the Crown Prince of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. They met at the prince's private palace in Abu Dhabi. This is a big deal, right? It's the first time an Israeli leader has made an official visit to the UAE. It marks a fairly significant change, or at least significant moment in the relationship between the countries. Number 4, some restaurants and grocery stores in California are suing to block a new law that they say might raise the price of pork, maybe even lead to some bacon shortages. The law requires farmers to make more space for animals like hogs to move around, but farmers say that's going to be too expensive for them. The law is supposed to go into effect on New Year's. Number 5, Time Magazine Person of the Year. You know who it is? Spoiler alert. Elon Musk, the Tesla and SpaceX CEO. The magazine's editor-in-chief says few individuals have had more influence than Musk on life on Earth and potentially life off Earth, too. We want to get back now to the tornadoes that have hit 6 states as we learn new details here at NBC News about a candle factory in Mayfield that had more than 100 people in it. You heard from one of those survivors, one of those factory workers earlier in the show. Well, now NBC News is learning that employees, some of them, say supervisors threatened to fire them if they left their shifts early because of the tornado warnings. Now, the company, we should note, is totally denying those allegations. They say it is absolutely untrue that the employees would not be able to leave. Dion Hampton broke that story for NBCNews.com. Dion is joining us now. Dion, I understand you pop back to your hotel room. You're going to get back out in the field later on tonight. Tell me a little bit about how employees walked you through what happened on Friday as the storm was coming in. What did they tell you? How did they try to stay safe?
Sure. So I just broke a national exclusive less than an hour ago. This story stems out of me going up to one of the shelters that was housing a lot of the people who had lost all their worldly possessions, who didn't have any power and electricity. No, the city doesn't have any power and electricity. And I talked to a guy there while I was interviewing him. He told me that he was an employee of the candy factory, and that while he was there, before the tornado came, a lot of people there had wished that they would have been able to leave and go home to take shelter there with their loved ones or somewhere else that was safe, but they weren't allowed to, because if they did, they risked losing their jobs. So I followed up, and I've spoken to 5 people who all give me the same story.
And the story is what? That when those sirens hit, they tried to leave and they were told you might be fired if you do? That's what they're sort of saying, these employees?
Correct. Initially, the company wanted, as the first sirens went off, I'm going to say around between 5:30, 6 o'clock, and they wanted everybody to maybe take shelter in the bathrooms and the hallways. But then there was a 3-hour window between then and when the second siren had came. And that's when a lot of the employees there had asked to go home. So we're talking 15 employees. That's on the low end, possibly up to 40, but I'll just call it 15 for now. But who had asked, listen, it's getting dangerous outside. We're worried for our lives. Can we go home? And they said, well, yes, but if you do, don't bother coming back.
Wow. Now, I have to say, and we said it right at the top, Dion, company's saying, the company's saying this did not happen, right?
Correct. So I spoke to the company spokesman earlier today, and he said that ever since COVID started, that they have a policy where you actually are allowed to leave at any point during your work shift. You can leave and decide to come back the next day. So that means if you want to stay there for 45 minutes, okay. If you want to stay there for 2 hours, okay. If you want to stay there for the whole shift, okay. So they're denying the allegations, but the employees are sticking by their story. And
some of them I know are still in the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, one of the women who I spoke to was literally 2 o'clock this morning, and she was talking to me from her hospital bed. Wow. She sustained a lot of burns. She was trapped under a concrete wall for 6 hours, and we started talking on the phone, and this is how much of an important issue this was to her, but she didn't even bother going to sleep because she was saying, listen, Dion, this is what the work conditions were like when we were inside the candle factory.
Dion Hampton, you said it. It's a national exclusive that you broke. It is some important reporting, and we're really glad to have you stand on top of that. I'll let you get back out in the field. Thank you for your hard work. I appreciate it, Dion.
Thank you so much.
A church in that same town in Mayfield is trying to send a message of hope, even with all the devastation we've seen. I want to show you this video from inside the First Christian Church. Look at this. There's a door gone. The roof's gone. I mean, there's nothing. This is an open-air church. Didn't used to be, right? People would have sat where all those pieces of wood are. You see the piano there, standing alone. But look at this. The altar, still standing. It's covered in debris, but it is still standing. Dr. Milton West is the senior minister of that church and joins me now. Pastor West, it's good to be with you. I have to ask, how are you doing? How are your parishioners doing? Just give me a gut check tonight.
Well, I think we're hanging in there. It's been a brutal several days, but we're pulling together. A number of people have lost their homes. Fortunately, there's been no fatalities. And once we saw that it was safe, reasonably safe to go into the building, we've been trying to salvage some things. The altar or communion table that you just shared with your viewers, we managed to retrieve from the building, and it is now safely set aside and secure. So at least that is the only thing of substance in our service that survived this horrific storm.
You said something really beautiful, though. I understand that your message to your parishioners was the church is the people. The church is not the building. Explain that.
Well, the church is wherever two or more are gathered. And we knew that this building is a spiritual place for us, but it wouldn't be spiritual without the people who come and invest their spiritual lives and experiences with one another. So, we worshiped out in our parking lot, had communion. This was yesterday morning, had about 100 folks with us. Also, our friends from across the street at First Presbyterian Church joined us. So it was a brief time of celebration and remembering. and then we went right to work starting to salvage what we could from our building.
What do you need?
So it is a labor of love.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Pastor. It sure is a labor of love. What do you need? What are the things outstanding that you still need from people? Because I have to tell you, there are so many people around the country who are watching this and who have been watching this coverage and are going, how can I help? We're 2.5 weeks before Christmas, not even, right? Like any time of year, this would be a horrific thing to happen, but especially now. How can people help you?
Well, I think the first thing they don't need to do is just pack up a car with some water and some diapers and drive down here without knowing what they're doing. While all of us here in Mayfield would appreciate all the sentiment that goes with that, I think the first thing that needs to happen is, if you want to support our church in our rebuilding effort, you can certainly go to our online giving app, givelify.com or Givelify, and you'd have to look it up and look for First Christian Church in Mayfield and follow the prompts if you want to support us financially. But I think the most important thing is if you reach out to the city of Mayfield, they have started a fund for tornado relief that will also help the people who've been displaced from their homes, provide food in a coordinated effort. And I think that's something that's needed. We need coordination. We absolutely must have prayer from people. But when we get here, it becomes a matter of getting the resources to the people in the right way in the right time and making sure we serve those in greatest need first.
Pastor West, Dr. Milton West, thank you so much for talking us through that. I so appreciate it. Listen, you heard Pastor West talking about ways you can help. I want to pull up a graphic here. Just take a quick picture of your screen. We're going to leave it up for another couple seconds here. These are all the different ways that you can help some of these tornado victims. Relief funds. Snap that photo. We'll tweet it out, too. We'll put it up on our social media pages as well, so you have it. Because as you see and as you hear from the people you've heard from tonight on the broadcast, they need help. We're keeping an eye not just on Kentucky, but on what's happening back here in Washington tonight, with the January 6th committee set to vote really in just a matter of hours on whether to recommend contempt of Congress charges against former President Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows. In fact, by the time you go to bed tonight, you'll know if this committee has taken a significant step forward in doing just that. They're upset because Meadows has twice ignored this congressional subpoena to testify. And just ahead of this vote tonight, Meadows' lawyer sent a letter to the committee saying, hey, don't hold him in contempt because former President Trump is making this claim of executive privilege, and that should protect close advisors like Meadows from testifying. That came after the committee released a 51-page report that mentions an email Meadows allegedly sent to somebody, we don't know who, on January 5th, the day before the Capitol riot, saying National Guard troops would be at the Capitol to, quote, protect pro-Trump people on the day of the insurrection. Obviously, that's getting a lot of questions. We think if this vote passes the committee tonight, and there is every indication it will, it'll go to the full House tomorrow. We'll have more coverage then. Coming up here in the show, some families are not raising their babies as boys or girls, but instead are letting their kids decide. Why some moms and dads are going with gender-neutral parenting. We're talking about that in tonight's original. Plus, it looks like Santa's little helper got a little bit of an upgrade this year. Check out what the post office is doing to make sure your holiday gifts get there in time. That's coming up in The Local. Some parents making a real effort to let their kids pick their own gender identity by eliminating some of those traditional trappings of that gender binary, the pink, the blue, etc. I talked with one family about it in the original. That's next, plus what California is trying to do on that front. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, check this out. Fire officials in New Hampshire rescued this little guy. Can you see him in that picture? A dog plus 2 hunters who got stuck in a cold and muddy river. One of the guys got too close to the edge of the water, fell waist deep. His partner couldn't get him out. Police said it was a dirty job, but said everybody, including the dog, made it out just fine. There's that pup. From our Southeast Bureau's 20 sea turtles got the trip of a lifetime, right? From New England to the Florida Keys to warm up this winter. Why? Well, they're Kemp's Ridley sea turtles. They're not just the rarest species of sea turtle. They're the world's most endangered. Back home, the little turtles were exposed to these freezing waters. They started getting hypothermic reactions. Well, now, some special treatment down in the Keys with plenty of hydration, plenty of vitamins, and rehab and warm water tanks. Sign me up. Also, from our Southeast Bureau, The post office in big Texas cities have some special little helpers on the job to make sure you get your holiday packages on time. There they are, robots. More than 100 of these automated sorters have been put in place at facilities across the country as part of the Postal Service's $40 billion plan for better service. They can run about 20 hours a day and handle thousands of packages every hour. We want to bring you today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And on this one, we're looking at what's happening out in California, where school officials are really getting on this push to make their gender-neutral and transgender students feel safe on campus. The state superintendent is announcing a new committee will be in charge of seeing which schools need gender-neutral bathrooms. It's part of a broader conversation we're seeing more and more about parents talking about how to empower their kids to express their gender identity more freely at a younger age. And in some cases, parents aren't assigning a gender to their child until that child is ready to decide for themselves. It's called gender neutral or gender creative parenting. I talked with one family in Colorado who embraced this. Watch. When Grayson and Ronan Els were born, Mom Styler hoped to raise them in a gender-neutral way, but found out fast that's not easy.
It's always hard because everyone else around you really wants to get in that engendered box, and so you end up with a lot of pink things when you have a girl. You end up with a lot of blue things when you have a boy. A lot of that was trying to kind of fight against it because I really wanted them to just be their own people, whatever that looked like.
Did you feel that growing up?
It definitely took a lot of pressure off to be able to kind of just be who I wanted and not have to present myself in a certain way.
Grayson, now 15, used to identify as she, her, but now prefers they, them pronouns. So does Ronan, who's 10 and came out as non-binary 3 years ago.
It was good because all of my teachers helped me out and stuff, and anytime one of my classmates would be like, because my teacher would go because they, and it was just pretty nice to know that I had some people after me, including my parents.
Their school, supportive, but their more conservative community outside Denver, still adjusting.
We definitely feel the judgment. At the doctor's office the other day, I had a gentleman follow me into the women's restroom because I suspect that he thought that I was transgendered and was not a fan of me being in the restroom at the same time as his wife.
What was your favorite part of school today?
Experts say raising your children gender neutral means giving your kids the opportunity to express and interact with the world outside of the traditional gender binary, boy or girl, and choose whatever feels right.
Gender identity and gender development is a journey. And I think that it's really important for folks to keep that in mind, that as individuals develop, their gender journey may change, and that's okay. And it's really important for us to sort of be supportive of folks being able to explore their identities and find their authentic sense of self as they continue to develop.
On social media, there are dozens of Facebook pages and Instagram accounts to help parents figure it out. One group went from having a few hundred members just 3 years ago to more than 1,300 now. And on TikTok, hashtag Gender Creative Parenting has more than 16 million views. More states are offering the option to indicate whether someone is non-binary, intersex, or transgender on government documents like driver's licenses and passports. But even now, it's still not always easy.
It's a constant emotional labor to get people to identify and respect who you are as a human being, and that takes a lot of effort.
Well, do you ever think about what it would have been like for you and for yourselves if you had been raised in an environment where it was okay to be gender nonconforming?
It would have been a lot easier. I knew I was a boy when I was 6 years old. I knew I was different. I've learned a lot along the way, and I'm happy where I am.
And for families like the Els, building a support system can be huge.
I will hold respect for you and exist alongside you. You can hold respect for me and exist alongside me.
With their neighbors, their educators, and of course, with each other.
If somebody's mean to me in school, I always talk about it with my sister, and then my sister says I'll beat a kid up. And
very protected.
It's just nice to know that somebody has your back.
I cry. You're so cute. I love you.
Jax, I can tell this is emotional for you.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay. Tell me why you're feeling this emotion.
I don't know. I didn't grow up with the support ever. I never had this, and to see it in an actual family and to know that it is out there. And like, I love these kids. Like, they're not biologically, they're not mine and everything, but like being a step parent, like I love them like they were mine. And to see that there are parents out there that will support their kids 100%. It's good to know.
Incredible family. You know, Styler told me that they raise their kids to have big ideas by allowing them to explore their gender identity while they're young, and that might prepare them for what life will be like as an adult. Also on the show tonight, Larry Nassar's abuse survivors reaching a $380 million settlement. This is huge. This is big-time money. The former team doctor, remember, was convicted of sexually abusing hundreds of gymnasts. Olympic gold medalists like Simone Biles, Michaela Maroney, Allie Raceman all came forward to say they were abused by Nassar or somebody else in the sport. More than 500 gymnasts will end up compensated by USA Gymnastics and the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. It's one of the biggest settlements ever for a sex abuse case. And just like that, Peloton is firing back at its cameo in the Sex and the City reboot. Spoiler alert, something big happens that makes the exercise equipment company look pretty bad. But can Peloton really take the show to court over product placement? We're going to get into this one coming up. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. When life gives you a problematic plot twist and you're Peloton, maybe you make a new ad. It's exactly what Peloton did after the Sex and the City reboot. And listen, I'm going to be totally honest with you. There is a huge spoiler that's about to come up. So if you do not want to have this series be spoiled for you, stop. Go get something to drink. Go grab, you put your device down, mute your television, whatever you're watching on. Just, I'm literally giving you all of this time to walk away. I don't want to get your angry tweets. I don't want to get your mean emails. I'm giving you plenty of time before we share the spoiler, okay? All right, I think that's fair warning. But I'm willing to bet that if you've stuck with us, you probably already know this plot twist already. I haven't watched it, but I already know what it is. A key, Mr. Big, key character, you know, carries a long time on and off love. He dies on a Peloton of a heart attack after working out on the bike, right? So here's the thing. Peloton says they gave permission for their bike and instructor to be included, but reportedly had no idea how they'd be used. So Peloton, overnight, dropped this ad that brings Mr. Big back to life. Watch.
Should we take another ride? Life's too short not to.
I mean, I should say, he just, again, living in the sport, he doesn't die on the bike. He dies right after a workout, right? This ad that you just saw came together in like less than 2 days, less than 48 hours, has a Ryan Reynolds voiceover, and his company produced the whole thing. But this controversy, listen, Peloton's had a real tough couple years, right? They were doing pretty well when the pandemic first started. People were stuck at home, wanted to work out. But then they had to recall 125,000 treadmills after dozens of people were hurt and a child died. Their stock price dropped after the Sex and the City episode last week, closing, you can see it here, $41 today. But we couldn't help but wonder, how much is HBO at fault here, right? Like how much argument does Peloton have against HBO for using their product like this? We thought, let's take the legal angle on this story. Let's bring in somebody who not only loves Sex and the City, but loves the law, and that's Danny Savalos. Danny, thank you so much for being here tonight. Listen, Peloton said reportedly they had no idea their product would be involved in this plotline like this. HBO didn't tell them because of confidentiality, right? If you're like Peloton's legal counsel, are you going after HBO on this?
Case dismissed on this one.
Really?
Peloton doesn't have a case against HBO. Theoretically,
I'm not saying they
HBO,
do. This is a hypothetical conversation, to be clear, but like, you know, what would the options be?
Right. Theoretically, Peloton might have a cause of action if they gave their product to HBO, licensed it to HBO, and HBO disparaged Peloton. But that's the key. All you have is the fact that Big rode a Peloton, and then, well, I have to get into the spoiler, then, something bad happened to Big after he got off the Peloton.
You can say, Dan, I already said it. I'm taking the heat. He died. You can say it. It happened.
Okay. So you have correlation, but you don't have any causation.
Got it.
It doesn't make Peloton look bad. Frankly, but it makes Peloton look good to people. Hey, our workouts are so hard, you might almost die. And frankly, with the size of my tuchus during all this holiday eating,
Danny
I need a
Savalos,
workout.
no, you are not coming on this show and saying the word
tuchus.
We are not off the rails here, my friend, okay? Keep it in bounds, please. Would you advise, listen, you've made clear that if you were their legal counsel, you'd say just drop this. But what's interesting is, like, we don't see many ads in streaming, right? Like, that's the beauty of streaming, is you're not seeing ads. What you do see is product placement. We can all think of a show where we've seen the product, whether it's Apple or whatever, right? Do you think brands could have more say in the way that they're portrayed, right, during negotiations? Looking at the Peloton example, like, is that a thing that could come out of this from the legal perspective?
Absolutely. What I think you will see is that brands will get into more elaborate contracts where they say, you don't have to tell us the outcome of the case, but you can't show people dying as a result of using our product. And again, it wasn't as the result of necessarily.
Right, of course.
Big led a pretty highfalutin lifestyle. Not that I ever watched the show, but I know he ate a lot of steak, had a lot of drinks. Any of those things could have caused a heart attack, and most Americans know that.
Danny Cevallos, let me retract what I said. You can say took us anytime on this program. You're welcome back whenever you'd like. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and your legal perspective. That does it for us this hour. More for you tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.